Trigger warning, ladies and gentlemen. We have our first trigger warning on the show. This episode covers some childhood traumas, so if you find that sort of topic hard to listen to, this might be a tough one. But I hope you stick around because this is a really, really amazing conversation with Ameé Quiriconi. She's a best-selling author. She's a podcast host, mother of two. She gets really vulnerable in this conversation, and she shares her struggles with parenting, how her childhood experiences really shaped the mom she became and what she had to do to overcome that and reparent herself. I really, really think this is going to help a lot of people. So I hope you get some value out of this one. I appreciate you listening. If you would, click the follow button, leave me a rating, share. That would mean the world to me. It's the best way to help grow the podcast. Anyway, on to the show. Welcome back to the Successful Working Parents Podcast, the podcast where we talk to successful working parents. We're still working on the title, but we're feeling good about it. My guest today, she is Administrative Officer of the City of Redmond. She's the host of the One Broken Mom podcast. She is the author of The Fearless Woman's Guide to Starting a Business, mother of two. Ladies and gentlemen, Ameé Quiriconi. Ameé, welcome to the show.
Thanks. I feel like there should be like a little applause or something like that. Walk out on stage.
Here we go. I have this. How about this?
There you go. That works. Oh, awesome.
All right. Well,
I'm happy to be here.
Yes. Excited to talk to you today. So we were chatting before this, but why don't you kick off and explain a little bit more about your career?
Well, I don't know that we have enough time to go through my whole career, but as you and I were just talking about when we first started connecting, I'm still currently doing this work. I was brought into the city of Redmond, Washington. We're that little suburb outside of Seattle where Microsoft, in case anybody's heard of them, actually lives.
I have.
And I've been working with them for about a year as a senior talent consultant. I was brought in to develop a recruiting program for them to help kind of improve because they were like everybody else dealing with recruiting challenges, post-pandemic and stuff. But recently, I have actually been selected to become now the deputy fire chief as the administrative officer for the fire department, which is, as I've said to friends, like this wasn't on my bingo card of job titles I would have. And if you kind of go down my resume, you'll see that I've worked in a lot of different industries. So it's kind of like it's on brand for me to just go completely in a different direction in terms of a career path. It's not really a changing career path, but yeah, to be able to go into public safety and work more specifically with our great fire department is kind of the exciting change. So that goes into effect like September 1st. So whenever your listeners hear it, I could already be doing it or maybe not. Don't know.
I think they will by then. Yeah. And how about your role as mother? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, that's been quite a journey. My kids are now, like my youngest is now 18 years old. My oldest is 21. I've been an entrepreneur nearly their entire lives. I've gone in and out of, owning my own businesses and stuff. And it was not without a lot of problems and a lot of challenges, which is what led me to doing the One Broken Mom podcast, which was the journey of discovering why motherhood started off with the best of intentions, hit a rocky middle, and now I'm at a good place, excuse me, with my kids and with myself that's taken years of, therapy and self-help and work and stuff like that and all that good stuff. But I'm super excited, and stoked, about that personal journey of motherhood and doing that and trying to run businesses while having kids and trying to be a professional while having kids and everything in between.
Yeah. Well, let's dive a little more into that. So let's maybe go back to when your first kid was born. What were you doing at that point for career?
Let's see. I actually was wrapping up. I had been working for 7 years as a consultant with an engineering company in Seattle and started to get my master's degree and thought that what I would do at that time would be to be a stay-at-home mom, work on my degree. And I did that because I was thinking that I wanted to be the opposite of what my own mother was, and in terms of a lot of things. And so I thought, well, that feels like the right thing to do. So we call that the neo-traditionalist mindset of, give up your career and just be a full-time mom. And that actually is exactly what I was doing when I invented recycled content building material and started a manufacturing company. So I did the exact opposite of where my intentions were because I discovered when my son was born that, I loved him. I liked spending time with him, but my brain was too busy. I had too many things going on in my head. And I felt like being out of the workforce allowed me to have the creativity to go off in this awesome journey of entrepreneurship and, building this manufacturing business. So basically, he grew up with me starting in entrepreneurship. I was also consulting with a local city. And I remember taking him out with me on job sites and like my baby Bjorn on my chest and watching tractors digging out a trench for a water reclamation system at a fire station. And I was able to build a business while being a stay-at-home mom. So I was doing a bit of both. And so that's where that started. So when I started my manufacturing business, I was figuring out how to be mom and business owner at the exact same time.
Okay, so a couple of things there. Two things that have been coming up on this podcast a little bit lately that you mentioned. The first one is wanting to do things differently than the way our parents did them. I feel like that's a pretty common theme, certainly something I've been thinking about as I'm a father now. And so, yeah, I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. Like I think everybody wants to not necessarily do the opposite, which is what you said, but just do it better, right? And I assume you felt like being a stay-at-home mom would be not only the opposite, but better, right? So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that thought process.
Yeah, and I mean, and to be honest with you, I didn't know necessarily what that meant back then, right? Like I know what it means today. And again, that's a journey, a journey that involved again, working with, a wonderful therapist and unpacking, what childhood trauma does to us and how that informs our parenting. But at that time, it felt like I had an emotionally distant, unavailable, immature parent. And so the opposite to me felt like I'm going to be present, I'm going to be available, I'm going to be on top of my kids' needs, because that was the opposite of what my lived experiences had been. And but I thought that was it, that was enough. And of course, as we all begin to learn, as we learn ourselves and we start to unpack our experiences, that wasn't even close to what it was I needed. Like because it felt like in order to be a good parent, I couldn't, like, it was like this or that, like black and white thinking. But like I said, for me, I didn't like the fact that, as a kid, I was put in charge of everything. I was the oldest sibling with three younger brothers. And this is pretty common when you're the firstborn child, especially in a household of dysfunction, that, the oldest child ends up taking on a hero role of being, the parent to the parent and the parent to the younger brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
And so that was something where I just didn't want to have that. Like, I didn't want my kids to feel like that was what that they'd have to grow up with and stuff. But I'd find out 7 years into this whole thing that what I thought I needed was not even close to what I really needed, because I ended up going down a path where I was walking and following the steps of my mom, despite not wanting to do any of it, to the point of where my marriage fell apart. And I ended up, when my husband and I separated, he ended up becoming the custodial parent because it was very clear I was overwhelmed by motherhood. And, you only find out after a few years of therapy of like, of course I was overwhelmed by motherhood. I had no mom models for me. I had no idea what I was doing. You can't read enough, what to expect when you're expecting books. Those don't tell you what it's like and what happens when your dysfunction catches up with you all of a sudden once you become a parent that you're not aware of. You don't even know you have those things until you suddenly become the parent yourself. And you're like, wow, my toolbox empty, not enough stuff in here for me to figure this out and to do it well for myself or for my kids.
Yeah. I mean, it's so true that there's just no way to prepare. And especially if you don't have those like healthy role models before you, there's no amount of books, and they just sort of give you a baby at the hospital. And then you're just they really should, like, this just happened to me. Like, there really should be a test, and there isn't. They just let you leave. And so you're just kind of left to your own devices. And so, man, there's a lot there. But so at that point, do you have to rethink your career? I guess it sounds like you were pouring yourself into your career a bit, and then you don't have custody of the kids. So then are you rethinking the way you're approaching your career, and then thinking, okay, I need to really just focus more on being a mom at that point?
No, not yet. That will happen a few years later. So while I had a relationship with my kids, I will say that. So what their dad and I decided was he could see the stress, and he's like, let me be in charge. Let me be the main parent for them, and and I still worked on having my relationship with my kids, but I was in the role that probably in the United States so many of us are familiar with seeing, which is mom's the custodial parent and dad gets the like weekend visits, right? And so in our dynamic, it was the opposite of that. And I've said this before, so what I'm going to share with you is not going to be anything new. I've said this on like my podcast. This is a part of our journey of really just being honest again with our experiences, our feelings, and everything we're going through. And I but I felt relieved at having to not have to show up every day in that way because it was killing me. Because again, I didn't know how to. Um, the things that I figured out later were that what parenting was doing to me was overwhelming my nervous system tremendously because as a kid, I was parenting kids when I was a kid. And I was just suddenly felt like there was no more me left. And that's how I felt growing up was when do I get to be the kid? Like, why do I have to be the one in charge? Why do I have to give up everything that I want? Like, I want to go out and hang out with friends, but I can't because I'm stuck at home taking care of like three younger brothers. And so parenting triggered all of those feelings in me of like, well, when do I get to do like me? And honestly, my husband at the time, the kid's dad, he'd come home and he didn't care how I was feeling about this, the overwhelm or anything like that, because it was the end of his day for him and it was my job. And again, this is where we talk about like these gender roles and these household labors and duties that women find themselves in. And so I didn't have any relief. And the only relief that I had was to leave. And he saw that, that it needed to happen, but but I took this time to think that what I was doing was getting some breathing room and fresh air. And but unfortunately, all this junk that had been bubbling up transformed me into a relationship that turned out to be an abusive relationship. And so I didn't go from like a great it didn't go from bad, it went from bad to worse. And it was going through worse before I was able to kind of really again put the responsibility on my shoulders to sort out what was going on, like at that deeper level. Like, why would I go from here to here? What is happening to me for these things to happen in my life? And that's that accountability, to be able to say, I'm not responsible for being abused. I'm not responsible for what happened to me as a kid, but I am responsible today to figure out what I need to do differently and how I'm going to do it. And then I took on that responsibility of, oh my God, if I don't do this, I am going to be willing this to my children. And so the moment was in December of 2017 where the abusive relationship was over. The kid's dad had hit a breaking point because they were entering their teenage years and he felt like he didn't have the tools to be their parent at that period of time. And our daughter, quite frankly, was really struggling, like emotionally struggling. I mean, of course she was. There's a whole lot of dumb stuff going on that her parents were doing. And so I made that commitment of I'm going to step into this role once and for all. I'm going to do it 120%, and I'm going to do whatever it takes for my kids, because if I don't do that, they're going to be in their 40s sitting on a couch, bankrupt emotionally and financially, figuring out their life, and I don't want that for them. So this became the whole, like, it's no longer about what my mom did to me, it's about what I'm doing to my kids and what am I going to do about that right now to change that course of that. And that was, again, going to therapy, really rethinking about, choices that I, was making about that were trying to fill my own void inside, and to think about it from a different perspective of like, if I don't have a hole to fill, then what would I do differently? What kind of career decisions would I make? What kind of money decisions would I do differently? And then of course, how else do I show up as for my kids in the way that they need me? Because I had time to still get them on a course correction, like all wasn't lost. They were still kids and I had a chance to be able to do something about that. And so I jumped in and did all of it. And that's where One Broken Mom came from, is
Yeah.
is that journey of discovering and doing that and sharing that with other parents who may be, having to deal with the same kind of junk I had to deal with and still deal with.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I really appreciate you, sharing all that and being vulnerable and sharing that space with me. I want to say I do relate. My parents got divorced when I was like 7 or 8, and I mean it wasn't the worst home ever, but I was the oldest sibling, and there was definitely a little bit of like, you know, I joked about like being the third parent at times. So I definitely can relate to what you're saying, and I appreciate you sharing that. Um, it's also, this is another thing that I think a lot about, because you think about those things that your parents did that had a negative effect on you, right? They were, not that they even did them intentionally, but and you try so hard not to do them. And I think that's sort of my biggest fear is repeating those same mistakes. And I think that, unfortunately, and your story kind of highlights it sometimes, like we're just sometimes, unfortunately, like we're just doomed to repeat those mistakes sometimes, right? And only then can you really learn from them after you actually go through doing it.
Yeah. Well, I think the big difference though is, that that's going to happen, like that could happen, right? I mean, let's go back, 15 years, and we don't even talk about mental health or trauma the way that we do today back then. I mean, in
Yeah.
fact, the ACEs study was just coming out in like 99, and that feels like that was a million years ago. But yet, I was in the midst of my parenting journey, and, I was 4 years into it already. And we were only beginning to understand the long-term effects of what adversity and dysfunction does, not only to our physical health, but to our mental health. So there's a lot that's happened. And that was part of like my motivation to begin to talk more openly is sharing these stories. Like I said, I've had people like call me terrible names for like feeling that way. And I'm like, I'm not the only person who feels that way. I just might be the only person who's actually said it out loud, you know, but we've all had that. But, the difference today is like, okay, I know this could happen to me. So I'm going to be alert and aware for that. And then go, oh, here's one of those moments that I knew was coming, that now I can see it as it's happening and I can start to pivot. But for some of us, when we started, like I said, my kids are, almost 20. And when my journey started, nobody told me that that was going to be the case. That there was a
Yeah.
tape recorder in my head that it recorded everything, good, bad, or indifferent. And that when I became a parent, that play button would get pushed, and suddenly I would start to just repeat them, because that's how we learn. That's how humans learn, is through what we were modeled or shown.
Yeah.
And we would do it regardless if it was good or bad. It was just what we learned. And so you and every other new parent listening out there has a huge advantage at being able to, as long as you're ready to be a little, reflective and self-aware in that way, and also be willing to just go, yeah, this is me, and be okay. Like, okay, wow, so this is one of those habits that I picked up that I didn't know I had, and here it is, and here's what I'm going to do about it, and not shame yourself, for having repeated something like, oh my God. And I catch myself, all the time, like, wow, that's a total thing that my mom would do, or that's definitely something from there. So I'm going to stop that right now, and then I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to do, or say or behave in a way that I know I need to. And it can be daily that you'll be doing
Yeah.
that to yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot about also the formative years of the child and how much influence you have on their psyche. And I think about it, again, I think you brought up a good point about you can't really change what happened to you and taking responsibility just for the way you behave now. But I do think about, okay, I could definitely see some things that when I was a kid that's why I do certain things today, right? So I think I guess there's, it's the only answer is to be self-aware of it, like you're saying. But I do think a lot about having a kid, and just these next 5 years are so crucial to like just
Mhm.
how much I can mess it up, right? In the next 5 years, I'm just like, well, she's screwed. So, how do you kind of stay ahead of that, or
Uh,
do
you know,
you?
well, yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, and again, this is one of those things like, man, I wish people would have told us that in the like, that the brain architecture of the first few years of development are like, can be make or break, right? But it doesn't mean, and then there's the whole thing like, and neuroplasticity tells us we can still change. Right. So that's what I always like, remind
Yeah.
people, like, yeah, we can make some mistakes, and, mistakes are made. But I mean, you and I are both living examples of how we might have had some neglect that happened, or dysfunction, and maybe even abuse, at certain times in our life. But it doesn't mean we're doomed forever. It does mean we may have a few extra bags to carry around with us that other people don't have to, but it doesn't have to necessarily, um, you know, like, just be like, we can't just say that, well, that's just my destiny. Like I had a bad childhood, therefore nothing's ever going to work. And I know there are people that think and believe that about themselves, but if you don't, then you have some hope. But, I think people they stress about the wrong things in the first 5 years of life. Well, I need to teach them how to read and I need to teach them how to all do all these things. And that pressure is actually can actually be really terrible for that little human brain. What kids need in those first 5 years is security. They need safety. They need to, this is when we get to teach them about emotional intelligence, and give them words and language and give them, autonomy, I think is one of the biggest things that, like all of us can like relate to, of like a lack of being able to choose our own things, either the direction we wanted to go, having somebody accept us for who we really are, because no matter what, our kids might be a mix of our DNA, but we're all individual humans, and whatever crops up out of us, our temperament, our personality, some of it is influenced by genetics and some of it is influenced by that environment. And I think that sometimes parents have difficulty, especially when you're dealing with your own inner demons, of seeing a kid be different than us or be like us and go, well, I couldn't get away with that and I couldn't do that. And then we think that from that parenting mode, like, well, I need to keep them from doing that, instead of allowing them to just bloom into whoever they're going to be. And that's really I think those are the most important things to just think about. Like, the rest of it, can be caught up or taught or adjusted. But the make or break is love and security, and making sure that there's enough of that, in those first formative years. That's what they need. And that's what gives kids the resilience to venture and be creative and, to go and develop on their own and know that they're accepted and loved and valued, no matter who they turn out to be. So it can be really that easy. And to be, and, we do make mistakes. I mean, all of us make mistakes all the time. Right. And in parenting, one of the things that we learn is that you can make a mistake because you're human. And what you get to teach your kid is, what do you do with those mistakes? Repair, apologize, comfort, acknowledgement. And again, always coming back to it, because really in those first 5 years, it's the ability to give them the safety and security that they need to feel like they can actually venture out into the world and go be creative and go be themselves and feel accepted. And then everything else after that, like, they're going to learn, out there in the world. But it is important. And again, I think we know that now. Like, at least more parents are starting to know that now, that those first years are critical to it. But it doesn't have to be so hard, as long as you just show up with love, and be present
Yeah.
and attentive to their needs. And that sometimes can feel really hard when you're like stressed out and overworked, and no one's attending to your needs, right? So then part of
Hmm.
that is to be the best parent for your kid is make sure you're taking care of yourself, because if you can't be present, which is what they need, um, it probably means that you're not doing enough self-care or working with your partner, the other parent, if possible, to take care of each other so that you can be that person.
So you have this kind of crazy trajectory, right? That you just shared. It sounds
Yeah.
like you come up on the other side of it, just being a better parent and doing a lot of deep inner work. Does your relationship to your career change at any point in this, or do you start to maybe make some sacrifices on the work side for the family? I'm curious how you start to see things differently as you
Yeah.
start to kind of progress.
Well, the biggest change for me, is, I've always been like, I've been entrepreneurial. I still am. So that's not going to change. There's still parts of me that, get to express that entrepreneurial journey. But, and I talked about this in my book, The Fearless Woman's Guide, where sometimes our journey into entrepreneurship is to fill that hole inside of ourselves, a hole that has nothing to do with business. It has nothing to do with professional life. It has to do with validation. And it has to do with, feeling, worth, being seen. It's a very ego driven perspective, which is why the first 3 chapters of the book are talking about our psychology and our world. Like, where do we come from and how are we out today? Because entrepreneurship may not be the answer to that. And for me, I found myself there for a couple of years where it was, I'm working really hard to own my own thing. And then realizing that how much of that is really because it's just still about me. it's still about me feeling important, and I'm putting air quotes around that because again, when you grow up in a life of, with neglect, feeling important is kind of a big deal. You got to get it from somewhere, and if you have had to go create it for yourself, then of course you go after things that give you that, that opportunity to do that. But as a single parent, entrepreneurship is really pretty sketchy because unless you've got people giving you money to help you out and start it, and somebody that can come in and take over the co parenting responsibilities while you're doing sales calls or working, I was working a lot. Like, sun up to sundown on weekends, doing whatever I could to be able to throw my name out there and to be able to build my coaching practice and my consulting business, and then get clients and then work on all of that, and then wash, repeat, and rinse. And it doesn't leave you time to be available to your kids. And so I made the decision of that. What is entrepreneurship to me? And what does my family need? And what my family needed was me being able to be available, me being able to pay bills consistently. Entrepreneurship, if you don't have, and a lot of entrepreneurs have a partner over here who has a day job that makes sure that the rent is paid or the mortgage is paid and the bills are paid and all that stuff. When it's all on you, those cash flow cycles can be, economically stressful to a household. So the
Sure.
decision to step out of entrepreneurship full time was an act of parenting, of like, can I get joy? Yeah, of course I can get joy out of being a really great employee for somebody, and I should be able to do that. But the benefit to my family is stability financially, as well as emotional stability for me to be present and not feeling like I have to work all the time. And when I did that, it brought peace to myself, because I was aware of what was driving that. And also it brought like financial stability and, to the family that we needed so that my kids didn't feel the stress and strain, because financial instability is a form of dysfunction and trauma that can affect a child's life growing up and their mindset about themselves and about the world. So that did change that dramatically. Now, if I'd had a partner, would I still be doing entrepreneurship more strongly? Probably, to some extent, but maybe not. I don't know. But as a single parent, I realized it wasn't an option for me. That I couldn't afford to do that and still be, again, ultimately the parent my kid needed and provide the house that they needed to grow up in for them to feel, again, safe and secure and have an ability to be able to flourish and not feel constrained.
Going back to the influence we have on their psyche, do you also think about how they see the way you approach your career and the relationship that you have to work?
Yeah, definitely. Well, workaholism, a friend of mine, Dr. Brad Klontz, who's a financial psychologist, talks about workaholism as being like the money disorder that gets passed down from generation to generation, right? And so I, was aware of like, gosh, what am I communicating to my kids by working all the time? That you can work a lot and never get anything to enjoy.
Right.
What I see right now is I have a 21-year-old son who definitely wants to be an entrepreneur, but he wants that. And we talk a lot about financial responsibility and leadership and all the other things that go along with entrepreneurship. And he right now he knows like, I need to learn, I need to go out there. And so I like his approach that he's taking right now at this point in time with it. He's not jumping into it. It's not really filling up the hole for him the way it was for me. It is the opportunity to be able to do what he loves with passion, and not it gets me to be in charge because I can't, because I want to always, be at the top, or I want to make sure that everything's done my way, which is a very control aspect that I see a lot of entrepreneurs. They go into the field because they can't release control to other people, and they can't share responsibility with other people, whether they're their coworkers or their bosses. So they go be their own boss so that they are, they have all the control, and that's not the healthy reasons to get into entrepreneurship. So, but yeah, my kids both definitely have work ethic. But they also, I've been very mindful to make sure that, I enjoy myself on my weekends, like working on my property and stuff like that. It's still work, but I'm a busy person. Like I have to be active. But I'm always thinking about like, what am I demonstrating for them? And so when I have my wins, I demonstrate my wins. And, when there's down times, I, talk about those with them of like, hey, this is a hard thing. And we talk about that kind of stuff. So I'm hoping what they see is that there's really a cycle to that professional life that goes up and down, and how to handle those, rather than this uniform idea that you just have to work hard to get ahead. They see me working smart. They see that, that it's not just, pounding out hours, that there's more to it, because there is more to it.
Sure. You mentioned one of the things on your journey was filling in the void of things that, you didn't necessarily have when you were a kid, and I can definitely relate to that as well. And just the idea of trying to make yourself feel better from the wrong things, right? And I I'd like to hear a little bit more about what does it mean to like kind of fill in that void? Is it really just a matter of self-care, or is it a matter of like reparenting, or how do you kind of fill that in so that you can then be there the right way for your kids? Because it sounds like that
Yeah.
was a big part of it for you.
It was, and you just actually mentioned one of the most important parts of it was reparenting. When there is always, we are dynamic and complex beings. We're not just a thing. We are like a mishmash of lots of things that make up who we are, right? And so we have this, the inner child, right? That's that part of us that gets triggered or activated, because of that lack. We didn't learn a skill the way we should have. We didn't learn how to name an emotion the way we should have. We didn't learn how to re-regulate ourselves under stressful situations as we should have. That's what parenting does for us. It's intended to teach us how to process those things. And so when we find ourselves, usually feeling tremendous stress or pain or suffering, anxiety, depression, it usually is the inner child that needs to learn those skills today. And so then we become the split personality, this present adult who's learning how to parent not only our kid, but at the same time, definitely parenting ourselves. And I know that for me, that's the biggest part of all of this, because as my kids are growing, and we're moving into these very different phases from like 11 years old to 14 to 16 to 17 to 20. Every phase of life brought up a new version of me at that age, right? Like what was my life at 11?
Yeah.
And I would sit there and go, okay, I'm feeling myself become two people, like, and I can think of examples of like tension. So you're in a tense situation where, in my house, it was very volatile, lots of screaming and yelling to get heard. And having a parent scream in your face is overwhelming. And so when you have a child who's upset and angry and they're screaming, it can easily activate my own nervous system to start to feel like the little kid being yelled at in their face.
Yeah.
And I've had to sit there and have a conversation inside at the exact same moment my child is in pain and suffering, to calm this little person down who's starting to freak out
Yeah.
by the parent. So I'm in and doing that. And that's like mental gymnastics that is crazy to have to go through. But it allows me to be here for my kid. I'm the present, calm adult. You're going to vent out what's happening to you, and I'm going to help you re-regulate yourself back to a place where you feel safe again, you feel calm again. We can talk about the problem, that needs to be, and at the same time calming down the little person inside of me that just wants to run or feels overwhelmed, by that whole experience. And I think that that's been the biggest thing, is that you have to be able to recognize when that's happening, or recognize when you're slipping into the mode of parent, like screaming back at them, going toe to toe with them, or whatever, the challenge might be. And I'm like, no, that's not, again, I want to be the opposite of that. Like, that's the parent that I had that I hated. So why
Yeah.
would I start replaying that? And sometimes
Oh no, I
and
lost
so
you
you
again.
have to, like, again, self-awareness and being present so that you can parent you and the kid at the same time. And that's not easy. It's super hard to do. And there's no easy way to figure that out except to do it, and then and keep remembering to show up that way every time you need to.
Yeah. You hear me, right?
Yep, they do.
Okay, cool. Um, Man, I am just dreading like when my daughter's like 7, 8, because that was a tough time for me as a kid, and I feel like I'm gonna kick up some stuff about around that time, right? And shout out to my mom. Mom, if you're listening, I know you did a great job. You did your best. Dad, I know you're not listening because you don't know what a podcast is, but he did his best. Uh, do you have any resources or suggestions for someone that'd be interested in reparenting, and what you just the tools you're just talking about?
Yeah, I'm going to make a recommendation of one of my favorite human beings in the world, which is Dr. Lindsay Gibson. And so that's my first recommendation. Anything that she's written, you should read. And so her first book was Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. And she's a compassionate writer. She's an amazing therapist. She does actually classes and workshops and stuff that you can work with her directly. But she's written like 3 books about how do you learn to reparent when you had emotionally unavailable and emotionally immature parents. And emotional immaturity doesn't mean that they were jokesters or whatever. It just means usually they didn't get the knowledge, skills, and abilities to be emotionally aware themselves, and so they come from that place. And some emotionally immature parents can be narcissistic at times, which can be a really troubling, dynamic to have grown up with. One of the things that I learned is while my mom was very self-centered, it was because she was like a kid. It wasn't that she was those covert narcissists. And then the other person that I think, another book that's really good, which is Dealing with Childhood Emotional and Neglect, and that's Dr. Janice Webb. That's a fabulous book that she's done, because emotional neglect is also the, kind of the underpinning of how we have difficulty showing up as a parent. And then Dr. Laura Markham, who talks about, her program is AHA parenting, which is some people call it the gentle parenting practices and stuff like that. And I think that'd be great for, you and your family at this point, because it's that balance of know yourself, know what you're going through right now, and how to understand that and give your kids what they actually need. So I think that those are like 3 great places for starting off with, of, again, understanding our own inner world, our own inner dynamic, how it's showing up, not just as a parent, but, because we're not just pockets. You're not just a parent. You are a human being who happens to have a child. You also have a wife, you have a job, you have friends, you have family members to deal with. You have all those complex relationships, and they aren't so easily siloed from each other. They all work in. And so when you start to do that, I think my parenting improvement has actually helped me with like team building and relationships and work relationships, because when I'm talking to somebody who is upset, I'm seeing that they too are dealing with this little thing inside of them, this little person inside of them. And sometimes as a leader, I make great headway with my coaching clients because I'm helping them learn to reparent themselves, and I'm parenting them through whatever difficult conversation we're having about a relationship at work or something like that. So there's a lot of crossover that actually helps us in that. But if focusing on, I'm going to show up for my kid, you will show up then in all your other relationships just amazingly well
Yeah.
on top of that.
Great. Appreciate that. I'll link to some of those things in the show notes as well. All right. We're going to move into the final segment called Ameé's Advice Corner. So I'm going to ask you for advice on a couple of topics, and you'll just
Okay.
give your thoughts. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So first question is, what advice would you give to a single parent or single mom who still has a job to do?
Still has a job to do, right? You have to work and you have kids in there. And first of all, like, it's not easy to do that, especially, going at it alone. And I think that it can feel really overwhelming, and it's really hard to sit there and, like, you just need to take care of yourself, because guess what? Sometimes single parents don't have financial resources for self-care.
Sure.
And so if there are friends that you have, it can be really hard to ask for help. And I think the biggest advice is to learn to ask for help if you're able to get it. Have a friend who can step in for you to watch the kids if you can. I think from the professional standpoint too, it can be really difficult to take time to think about, are you in the right place right now in your career? Are you being paid enough for what you need to be doing? Because that can actually keep you in that financial hole that you need to grow out of. And so self-care can sometimes be, am I advocating for myself at work enough to put myself in a situation where I have resources available to me? I can afford resources to help me out. And that was huge for me. Like, I'm stuck, but I need to make sure that I'm taking care of my value at work to ensure that I don't feel like I'm always going to be behind the 8 ball. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Makes sense. Yeah. What advice would you give to your former self?
I get asked this question a lot when I do these shows, right? And it'd be wonderful if we can go back in time. But as horrible as some of these experiences are, I'm not sure I would trade them, because I love where I am today. So my advice that I always go back to is to just, and I told this on, when I think I was actually talking with Lindsay, which is, I think I've been doing this, if in this multiverse life, which is, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay, because I know that through every up and down and hardship I've had this just voice inside of me telling me it's going to be okay. I know that this isn't ideal, this isn't what I expected, but I'm confident that I'll be able to, find my way through this. And so I think that's the advice I've been giving myself all my life.
What's the best advice you've ever received?
Oh my gosh, I've received so much great advice. But I think that, I had an opportunity to meet with Pam Leo, who, had a lot of, did a lot of work in the area of childhood development many years ago. And she said, and I say this all the time too, is, you just don't know what you don't know. And so the advice is usually like, just be aware that it's okay. Have grace on yourself because you don't know what you don't know. And you can't be mad at your past version of you for not knowing all that stuff at that time. And so grace is an important part of healing, which is sometimes it's grace that we have to give caregivers, so that we don't hold and bottle up anger, our whole life over things that should have happened a different way or didn't happen. And damn them. Like I should have been better off than I was. Like grace is necessary for that. But also we have to give ourselves grace constantly over and over again, especially when we make a mistake, which we're inevitably going to do with our kids, to sit there and go, don't excuse it as, well, whatever, but just to say, okay, listen, you messed up. We're gonna work on this, apologize, own it, and then figure out how to, what we're gonna do differently the next time. And that comes from just saying, like, again, you're gonna discover things about yourself as a parent through this journey, and you don't know what they are. You can be aware and mindful of them, but you just need to be aware that you're not gonna know it all yet, but you will at some point.
Yeah. All right. Last question. By the time this podcast comes out, my daughter will probably be 3 months, maybe 4 months. So what advice do you have for me as a father of a 3 to 4 month old daughter?
Oh my gosh. Well, again, you're still in a huge phase. You're changing. Like you are developing just as fast as she is in your parenting role. So again, I'm just going to say this to be graceful with yourself. 3 to 4 months. Maybe she'll sleep through the night, but probably not yet. That's one thing I learned is like when my kid was 3, I was like, this whole like they sleep through the night thing, when is that happening? Because yeah, maybe you'll get a couple of nights in it, but you're still going to be sleep deprived. So
Oh
your
yeah.
advice is make sure you're well rested, make sure that you're taking care of your brain, make sure that you're looking out for your partner as well, because there's still a lot of changes that are going on. When a human births another human, it doesn't just, things don't go just back to normal right away. And so your role would be, again, make sure that your oxygen mask is on so that you can take care of everybody else around you. And that person also includes your partner. Because remember, the way for the both of you to show up in your daughter's life is for the two of you to feel like you're at a safe place emotionally, and physically. Otherwise, if you're not, you won't be able to be there in the way that your little girl needs you.
Awesome. Appreciate that. Well, this has been a really amazing conversation. I know people are going to get a lot of value out of it. Where can people go to learn more about you, connect with you, or anything that you want to promote or share?
Sure. Well, so One Broken Mom is the podcast that's out there. It's been on hiatus since 22 because I bought a house, and when I first moved out here, it's a rural property. I had no internet access. So now, thank you to the world of satellite internet, I'm much better connected. But I did put it on a pause for a brief period of time. But there's 4 seasons of excellent, excellent, shows out there, and the shows aren't me talking. They're like this interview format where I have interviewed Lindsay, Janice, some of the people that I've mentioned and others on there. And so I highly encourage people, if they're starting this journey or kind of wanting to understand, their lives. A person said many years ago, when the show started, like, you don't have to be a parent to like One Broken Mom. The fact is we all had parents. So that's
Yeah.
the overarching theme of this, is that we were children. And then if you are somebody that's interested in understanding, if again, working or thinking about entrepreneurship, even though it's called the Fearless Woman's Guide to Business, because it does actually talk about some of the gender disparities that exist in the business world, and also some of the parenting and how gender roles have affected us and our relationship with business and professional lives. That could be a great book. I get a lot of feedback from people and readers that the first 3 chapters are this great, I very often get an email from somebody that says they've cried through the first 3 chapters because they're a validating part of the book of understanding our experiences and how we show up in the world and where we're at today. And then, you can find me on socials and connect with me there if you'd like to be able to do that. But and so, I'm on Instagram. It's just my name, Ameé Quiriconi. So you can
All
find me
right.
there. Yep. And on
Cool.
LinkedIn. I love connecting with people on LinkedIn.
Okay. I'll be sure to link to all of that as well. All right. Ameé Quiriconi, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And have a wonderful day. And congratulations on such a fabulous show that you're doing and the service that you're doing to other working parents. And congratulations on your new parented.
Thank you.